My cousin, Harry Hawkins, graduated from Brooks in 2010. He now works for ESPN as an associate producer and has worked on pieces for programs such as Sunday's NFL Countdown and ESPN's coverage of the Masters. I hope you enjoy what he has to say.
Good morning, my fellow Brooksians. It is wonderful to be here with you this morning. The last time I was up here I was singing from the Shrek soundtrack in my Boohoo Chapel right over there. So I promise that this is not that. I'll spare you all that this morning. Almost a year ago, I was on campus and I was walking past Thornhouse, where I lived for the entirety of my time as a student here. I was on my way to the brand new Center for the Arts to watch as one of my classmates, Albert Nascimento, unveiled some of the artwork that he does in his spare time as part of the center's grand opening celebration. As I walked, I couldn't help but notice not only how impressive the building was, but how much different that part of campus was and how much different the entire campus is since I was a student. It's an odd sensation because in my brain, it doesn't feel like I've been gone that long. But in May, my class, the class of 2010, will gather for our 10th reunion here on campus. A lot can and does and has changed in 10 years. But some things, in many cases, the most important things, stay the same, especially at a place like this. And that is why I asked Mr. Packard to speak with you all this morning. Last July, as we approached the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, I rewatched HBO's miniseries From the Earth to the Moon, which dramatizes America's victory in the space race. There's a scene at the end of the first episode that always has stood out in my mind. It takes place after the Mercury and Gemini programs have completed and Project Apollo, which will land men on the moon, is set to begin. Deke Slayton, who is in charge of all NASA crew assignments, walks into a small conference room in Houston and delivers a briefing to his charges. The crew assignments that will be made concern you all in the following manner, he says. The men in this room will be making moon landings. 2 of you will be first. I don't know which 2 that will be, but I do know that the first man to walk on the moon walked into this room this morning and is looking at me right now. I just thought you might want to know that. The response of the actors playing the astronauts in the room is subdued. It is clear that the men in that room were nervous, just like their real-life counterparts were at that moment. There was no guarantee that any of these men, tasked with testing new spacecraft, journeying to the moon, or landing on it, would be successful. They were uncertain as to what these missions would require of them and whether they could rely on meticulous training and technology that had not been invented yet to keep them alive. Despite these fears, those men rise from their chairs following the conclusion of the meeting and go about their business as if their boss hadn't just told them that one of them will be remembered for as long as people are remembered. They understood their responsibility, knowing that they would be given the best possible tools to fulfill their mission. They were ready to continue to do their part in achieving the single most impressive feat in American history. We know how that story ends, of course. They and their fellow astronauts, as well as the American people, undertook a massive responsibility and delivered when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon in July of 1969, and as President Kennedy said, were then returned safely to the Earth. It took a concerted national effort that had not been seen since the Second World War and has not been seen since, to deliver Project Apollo and make it a success. Suffice it to say, I do not believe such an effort would be possible now. I bring all of this up because I carry a message of responsibility for you all here. All of you today who are in this room will be making your own moon landings. Not literally, I don't think, but you never know. No, you will all be making moon landings in a different sense. You will be making proverbial moon landings, both as individuals and as members of teams, as doctors, lawyers, scientists, public servants, or whatever it is that you all decide to do with your lives. But your most important moon landings and your most important decisions will be as something different, as citizens. I grew up in Washington, D.C., with two parents involved in politics. One was a chief of staff to 4 Republican congressmen over more than 2 decades, and one was, and remains, a political journalist with what many people would describe as a slightly liberal ideology. I had a proverbial front row seat to the inner workings of one of the most powerful cities on the planet because of them and their experiences. As a result, I did my best to learn as much as I could about the government and the world and the way they worked, igniting a passion for those topics that I pursued at Brooks, that I pursued in college, and that I still pursue to this day, even though it is not my chosen career. And no matter how many questions I asked of them, or museums I visited, or disagreements I witnessed, I was consistently reminded by them of one thing. Active, engaged citizenship was the engine that made the whole thing go. It matters a great deal in a healthy system and society and government. As I touched on before, it would be an understatement to say that this country and the world have changed dramatically since the 60s or since I was born in 1992. It's changed dramatically since I last sat in these pews. And it's changed dramatically in the last 4 years. Politically, economically, environmentally, socially, you name it. You will all eventually venture out into a rapidly changing and increasingly polarized world. But one thing has and will remain constant despite all that change. No matter what college you go to or career you embark upon, your role as a citizen of this country and of the world is paramount. So what is citizenship? At its most basic, it is a status that grants you the right to participate in the American system. It secures your right to have a vote, no matter your race, religion, creed, ethnic background, or sexuality. Seems simple enough. But that right and that citizenship carries with it a great and complex responsibility. In practice, citizenship is something much more challenging and difficult because it requires you to care. Caring is exhausting. It requires you to think. It requires you to know the difference between right and wrong. It requires you to be able to tell the difference between fact and fiction. It requires you to read the news and to keep up on current events. Being a good citizen requires you to go above and beyond what some might consider a normal level of effort. And that is not an easy thing to do, especially these days. But there is good news. Regardless of your chosen career, every student in this room today is at an advantage because you go to Brooks. You have an advantage not only because of the academic knowledge that you can have and will gain here, but because of the sense of community that Brooks fosters and the value it places in making its students good citizens and good people, both of which seem to have become alarmingly rare. It is imperative that you bring that ethos with you once you leave this place, whenever that may be. Doing so will be difficult. There will be times in your life when you will feel completely overwhelmed, personally, professionally, and by current events. The real world is a challenging and scary place for everyone. It will become easy to become apathetic or indifferent to what is going on around you because you are so focused on your own life, or because you are so fearful or uncertain about what is going on around you that you simply choose to ignore it. That's not a criticism, that's just the way that our brains work. I admit that I was guilty of this indifference and apathy as recently as the spring of 2016. It's the way our brains should work, to an extent, especially at your age, and even at my age. It's important to enjoy life, especially when you're young. But apathy is the enemy of your job as a citizen, and you must do whatever you can to keep it at bay. Apathy desperately searches for a simple solution, which often doesn't exist. Simple solutions create polarization and fear, and polarization and fear create dysfunction or worse. A society cannot function if its citizens are apathetic to our shared challenges and decisions we must make as a national and global community. Which brings me back here to this wonderful place. A Brooks education is a precious thing, given what it can teach you academically alone. And your academic education here elevates you, all of you, to rarefied air when it comes to understanding the way the world works. But a Brooks education's most important impact is how you decide to live your life as a person and as a citizen once you leave this place, and how you carry the lessons you have learned here, both inside and outside of the classroom, with you for the rest of your lives. In fact, for you seniors, your job as a citizen started, or will soon start, officially on your 18th birthday, when you become eligible to vote, which is more than 4 years before most of you will enter the workforce after you graduate from college. Of course, those two things are closely related. It is important to utilize academic knowledge to form your personal belief system. As members of this community, you hold an advantage in that regard as well. And with this great fortune comes with it a great responsibility. That responsibility is to be leaders in society, both as individuals and collectively. As professionals, yes, but as people and citizens as well. You are all capable, and you will all be provided with the best possible tools to do so as a result of your time here. So, listen to your friend who thinks differently than you do. Ask them questions, engage in conversation and debate. Attempt to understand their point of view, and attempt to understand how their point of view can impact yours and how they come together. Subscribe to a newspaper and read it when you can. There's an app for that. Use the knowledge you've gained here, inside and outside of the classroom, to think critically and make decisions for yourselves as a citizen. When you hear something, validate it. Know how to tell what's true from what's not. Speak up when you see something you think is wrong. Register to vote, then vote. And when you feel apathy creeping into your brain, don't let it. Make your moon landing over and over again. As President Kennedy once said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. Thank you all so much.